I think that you'll have McAuliffe and you'll have either Cuccinelli or Bowling, which is one of those, because it's a convention, things that gets played out at a very local level in specific, county Republican units, when they pick their delegates and who's loudest, who is organized at each local level best. And that's something that, the larger public isn't going to pay attention to. But I think is very interesting, because I know Bill Bowling has been eating, chicken with Ruritan clubs and GOP offices for 10 years. I mean, he's been working on this forever. But like they say, Cuccinelli is a very good candidate. He's a very good campaigner, and while he's got some baggage, and certainly more baggage, I think, than Bowling does with the broader electorate, he's a candidate. You know where he stands on things. I mean, there's no real question about where Ken is on a lot of issues. So I think it'll be very interesting.
All of the easy alternatives have been pursued. We've issued a lot of debt. I don't think anybody thinks that we can really issue more debt. The governor 2 years ago acknowledged that debt was a short-term solution. The transportation community, the road builders and the like all got behind that on the condition that there'd be recognition it was short-term and we needed a long-term fix. And then last year, the biggest accomplishment was naming rights to bridges. The indexing of the gas tax is one serious option. Another one is scrapping the gas tax. It hasn't been raised since 1986. Its purchasing power is hovering around 40% of the value of the dollar since 1986. And replacing it with the standard statewide sales and use tax that we pay on goods. So that in itself would raise $730-some million. That would more than take care of our maintenance needs. There have been other suggestions as well, but there are fees. For example, there's more use now of hybrids and energy-dependent cars. There's discussion about imposing some sort of annual assessment so that they can pay their fair share. So I think you're going to see more serious proposals like that rather than some of the ones that we've seen recently.
The problem has been neglected so long that there are no real reliable, broad-based solutions that can be quickly put in place. For example, increasing the fuel tax. Had there been an index, had there been a trigger that would raise it, Virginia would have been able to, keep pace with its needs on transportation. But clearly, a fuel tax increase would produce a spike in new revenue. But again, because of the continuing efficiency of motor vehicles, in short order, it would decline. That there are new solutions necessary does not mean that there is any unanimity. For example, should Virginia consider an Oregon-like model, a mileage tax? There's a certain odor of Big Brother to that. It's been put in place in places like the Netherlands, and there have been lots of trade-offs. I don't know whether folks in the countryside who don't have mass transit and have to drive considerable distances to get things done would be too happy with it. And then I wonder, and of course Whit is a former transportation secretary, if part of the solution is another look at the template for managing our transportation system. We've had a unified system, a centrally managed system since the 20s. Now there was a reason for that. It guaranteed political control in Richmond, but it also, at least in theory, meant that there would be uniform quality across the state. We're not seeing that anymore. Maybe it's time to move to some type of decentralized, balkanized model.
I'm a bit concerned that things haven't gotten bad enough, the solution is likely to take place. And I say that bouncing along roads all over this state. But the reality that I think we often have to appreciate in politics is if you ask a politician to do something that's difficult, they're not really very interested. If you suggest to Republicans who have campaigned for much of their careers, if not all of their careers, on no new taxes, the idea of making these sorts of adjustments, one raises questions of fidelity to Grover Norquist, but more importantly, perhaps this general question of whether you would face a primary opponent for somebody who has a more consistent anti-tax message. And this is also part of the reason why you know, things may not go as smoothly as people might hope with respect to the sequester in Washington. I think that we're looking at a very problematic situation, not only with respect to transportation here, but also the larger state budget as a consequence of the difficulty of making a serious long-term solution with respect to the federal debt. So I do think it's important to recognize that these ideas that we're talking about may make sense from a policy perspective, but I really don't think they make sense from a primary campaign perspective. Because remember, for the vast majority of people in the House of Delegates and in the Senate and in the Congress, these lines have been drawn to make sure that one party wins. And so the real action, the real voters that you have to worry about if you're an elected official in one of these districts, and that's almost all of them, is the primary. It's not the general election. And so you don't have to worry about persuading centrist voters of anything. You have to worry about the 5% or less that will show up in your primary. And that's where you're going to have a very tough sell if you start going down the road of new revenue. And I think this is a problem both at the state and the federal level. And so, and that's why, like I say, as you know, bouncing over I-95 on my way to this conversation near the boulevard, thinking this can't be any way to run a railroad, I'm worried that it's the way that we'll be running this railroad for a while yet.
I would first like to say on this, I don't have any client. But like Governor Allen, I'm open for business. I think that we need to look at the situation down there. I think the Port Authority has a responsibility to continually assess their status. We know that in the 2 down years that they went down further than any East Coast port. We know that during the last 2 years they've come up less than any East Coast port. We know that 65% of the ports across the country are publicly owned and privately operated. It reminds me a bit of the banking situation in Virginia. You know, we talked about what a wonderful banking system we had and how our laws were great and we had the best banks anywhere. And all of a sudden, all the banks were located somewhere else. I think the Port Authority and Governor McDonnell are doing exactly the right thing. They are examining the situation and seeing what needs to be done. And I have heard no suggestion that from everything that I have heard, any revenues generated from that would go into port improvements. They would not go into the overall state transportation plan.